Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. No prayers, no buffalo speeches, and no spirituality shows. While this podcast does not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do take a tough look at history, oppression, and our survival. We highlight the voices of Native activists, writers, poets, artists, thinkers, and musicians who are fighting for the rights of Indigenous people all over Turtle Island. We may step on a few toes through our examination of culture, art, politics, history, and identity. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. In this moment of historical change and social justice, our voices matter now more than ever before. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
Hello and welcome to the program. I am John Kane, and we're going to get into a couple of things here. First off, I've got to address Joe Biden's comments. And look, he goes to Kenosha and tries to represent himself in a completely different light than Trump going to Kenosha. Trump meets with the cops, and Biden meets with the Blake family. And his obvious pandering becomes so apparent. And the comments that obviously made the news cycle and across Facebook and everything else was his overtures to address racism and to right the wrongs of America's original sin, slavery. Well, I got a problem with that because that's not the original sin. Slavery comes later, and it comes after massacres and a number of the items that essentially qualify as genocide. Murder, torture, any number of mass murders, all of the stuff that essentially, they actually call it depopulation, but so there's genocide. And of course, the genocide has a purpose, which is to take land. So genocide and land theft are America's original sins. Now, slavery is among them, but it comes later. But when you point out and you say you have to address America's original sin, as if there's only one, like there's only one original sin, you're not even going to name the first one, that's really problematic for me. And you know what? Look, I support Black Lives Matter and in all that it means. And its singular approach to shining a light on the fact that black people are disproportionately killed by cops and so many other things. There's so many ways that black people continue to be mistreated. And of course it's the legacy of slavery that contributes to it all. Of course it is. But man, it sure would have been nice to hear a black leader say, Mr. Biden, Mr. Vice President, whatever you want to call him, slavery is not the original sin. The original sin is colonialism, which is directly tied to slavery. So it's not to diminish slavery. But man, it would just be nice if when somebody hears something that has something wrong in it, because here's the deal. For Biden to skip over and ignore and refuse to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, there was some problems here. There was some major problems here. Even before slavery. The first transatlantic slave ship was not from Africa to the Americas. It was one of Columbus's ships back to Spain, carrying, not the least of which were sex slaves, young girls that would be making the trip back to be, sold off and pawned off to Spanish aristocracy. But man, it just would have been nice to have that acknowledged, and not by some black folks. The fact that Biden didn't do it, it actually casts not just doubt, but insincerity in the overtures that he made about slavery. Because if you can ignore genocide, land theft, and of course, like I said, genocide, I mean, that genocide is slavery too. Because when he's talking about America's original sin, he's not talking about enslaved Native people. This is a direct approach that he's trying to, appeal that he's trying to make to black folks. And I don't have a problem with him trying to do that. But by not acknowledging us, you're showing your insincerity, even to them, not just us, but even to them. So, and of course, Trump takes a completely different approach. He won't even acknowledge that there's systemic racism in any part of the United States, and just rejects the fact, the idea that there's anything wrong. In fact, he won't call it systemic racism because he thinks it's the norm. He thinks it's the way it should be. I mean, nobody who's a racist calls themselves a racist because that sounds bad. They think that they're realists. They think that they're pragmatists. They think that they're just living out to them what is the obvious, that they are a superior people, that they represent white supremacy. And they don't even look at white supremacy as a racist ideology. And that's why Trump doesn't. So, look, I got some major problems with Biden's comment. And and I posted a meme, and I said, "Hey, Joe, America's original sin was genocide and land theft. Slavery came after." And my frustration with Facebook only grows daily. I mean, there are a lot of morons on Facebook. And look, and when I say morons, I don't mean white racists. I mean, there's a lot of Native people who are just as ignorant on a lot of this stuff. So when I'm posting a meme like that across Facebook on Native group pages, it's amazing the level of ignorance. And of course, look, you say a comment like that, and it's predominantly the Christian natives who try to get all self-righteous about it, right? If I had somebody just go off and say, no, Native people were already enslaving people before before white men came here. Slavery was first, and what they were suggesting was that white men didn't bring slavery to our lands. That we were already involved in slavery in the same context that we're talking about here. And so, and I want to be clear here. America's chattel slavery system was unparalleled. There was no place that took slavery to the level that the United States did. And I don't mean just the other colonial territories, but the United States. I mean, the United States took the abuse and the atrocities and the horrors of slavery to a level that nobody else had, and kept doing it and kept it as a part of their economy for far longer than most places did. Now, look, I know a lot of people say, well, slavery still exists today, so you can't say the United States kept it going longer. Look, in the context that as far as a legal trade, the United States had kept it going longer. And the way they did, look, they were selling slaves in front of the White House. They had slave auctions in front of the White House practically. I mean, it's absurd. And of course, when we get into something, this debate between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, the most obvious point that can and has been made is that the reason we have to say Black Lives Matter is because all lives didn't include black people. They didn't include brown people. They didn't include Native people. When all was said in liberty and justice for all, and when they were talking about we the people, they didn't mean all. All didn't mean everybody. All meant white people. So when I hear a white person say, well, all lives matter, yeah, I know. You've been saying that you've been saying that for centuries. And you've always meant the same thing. All white people matter. So look, I call out to black leaders, or black activists, don't let Biden get away with saying something stupid just because he's pandering to try to get the black vote. I mean, we can still, we can still be attacking Trumpers and Trump and, Proud Boys and all that other stuff, as we should. But don't let these people claiming to be the left off the hook. I mean, just don't do it. Look, Biden has to be held more accountable, because if he's expecting to get a vote from people who want something changed from Trump, here's the problem: the Democrats have always represented the status quo. Like I said, I've said it before, Obama didn't get rid of the Patriot Act. Obama didn't get rid of prisons in Guantanamo Bay. Obama ramped up drone strikes. He ramped up deportations. He did a lot of things that Republicans are in love with. So we can't let on the chance, on the hope, whatever people want to say about Biden beating Trump in the election here, he should be held accountable now. Don't let this guy get elected and believe he has a mandate to uphold all of the stupid things he said while he was on his campaign. Call him out now. Call him out now. And if it hurts him against Trump, then shame on the Democrats for putting a moron like that up there for their nominee. And hold his top cop vice president nominee to a higher standard too. So look, I had to address this, but again, look, some of you watch this program on Facebook, and I know that my wife share this program to a bunch of Facebook group pages, but I'm finding some of these group pages to be increasingly difficult, and I have a lot of problems. Facebook is rapidly becoming just a cesspool of trolls and contrarians on every level. If you go to a Facebook group page that the name of that page is Haudenosaunee, and somebody goes off telling you, well, you don't have any rights to claim land unless God gave it to you. And we don't have, and the reason an administrator for that page won't hold that person accountable is because the administrators are Christians. So I mean, this is kind of the way this whole thing goes. So, I'm rapidly getting my fill of Facebook, and the hard part is, look, if I post something on a bunch of other pages and then I see some asinine comment that comes out, I've got to make that decision. And look, I've got people real close to me telling me, don't engage, just delete the comment, get out of there. And but it's tough. It's tough because I'm not trying to change the mind of a moron, but I want anybody else who's seeing some of these comments to know how stupid the comments are. And I guess I'm not giving people enough credit to see how stupid they are. But, to some extent, look, I've left a couple of pages recently because who needs that crap? And look, I mean, if I'm calling on an administrator to block somebody for saying something racist, yeah, maybe that's not if it's not my page. If it's my page, I'll just get rid of somebody. I mean, and you can call it censorship, you can call it whatever you want. I call it monitoring my page. But I don't know. I don't want to talk a whole lot about Facebook, but I did have to address the Joe Biden comment, because this is folks, this is going to be repeated. And I know that we are not a high priority. And look, I know there's a certain amount of tokenism, whether it's Andrew Cuomo or Barack Obama or anybody else, when they say, well, unless you're a Native American, we're all immigrants. That's the only time we get mentioned, right? and then they stop there, like somehow we are privileged because we were here first. Of course, they don't tell the history, right? They don't tell any of that history. So I don't want to be pandered to. But if you're going to make a stupid comment like slavery is America's first sin, I think all of us should say something. And even the right should say something. But the problem is the right doesn't want to admit that America's ever committed a sin. So I guess that's part of the problem. So there we go. That's all part of the problem. All right. Hey, I do have something else that I want to talk about, but I did want to open with that because it is kind of important. As many of you know, who have not only watched this show but have seen me perhaps on television or in the newspaper or on radio interviews, I've stepped up often when asked by schools to weigh in on the mascot issue. And and of course, the one most people around this area are familiar with is the Lancaster School District, where myself and there was a half dozen of us altogether were asked by the school board to meet with them, do an open work session. We participated in a community engagement session. We and of course I did some of the media thing. And ultimately, Lancaster got rid of their racist mascot and nickname and logo, and they were called the Redskins. And they got rid of it. And look, there were a lot of things going on, including all of the, or three of the local school districts that have a significant Native population. A student-led boycott against competing against Lancaster happened, and that may have had a lot of impact. But that says something. What it says is that it isn't just the activist community. Anybody who says, well, this is just a bunch of, white snowflakes trying to, make peace, political correctness, run amok or something like that. No, these are kids in school who said, look, we don't want to play a school that's mocking who we are, because it isn't just a mockery through the name. It was a mockery in the way that the students carried that name and that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, that was Lancaster. But I've gone down to Wilmington, Delaware. I've weighed in on web pages, for at least a dozen other schools. I spent a couple of hours speaking with a school board member from Glastonbury, Connecticut, as they were wrestling with their mascot and nickname, which were the Tomahawks. So this is what I do. But one of the things that I haven't done was personally address the high school that I went to. And of course, it is a little different, because when a school board, even if it's only a couple of board members or a couple of alumnus or a couple of students, when they ask you to participate, that's different than saying, okay, now I'm going to go, attack my alma mater. Because I want to be clear here. I went to school in the eastern part of New York State, in a small village called Cambridge, New York. And their school, the Cambridge Central School District, their mascot, they call themselves the Indians. Now, for most of the time that I was going to school there, my family was the only Native family there. Me and my three siblings. I had a sister who was older than me, so when she was gone, I was it kind of thing, and I was the oldest one of the Canes, attending Cambridge. And look, I was involved in a lot of stuff. I competed in athletics, and I did theater. I was in student government, all that stuff. I graduated 7th or 8th in my class, so I accomplished some things. And I got to tell you, my experience in high school was great. I had a great time in high school. I had a great time, competing. I had a great, I thought the town was great. I liked the village. I liked, the environment. It's a very rural setting. I mean, it was a small school, only a D section school, which is pretty small. And if you know what those numbers mean or letters mean, but no, it was beautiful there. I enjoyed living in Cambridge, or in the Cambridge area, going to school there. I enjoyed the teachers. I enjoyed the school. I enjoyed my classmates and underclassmen, older classmen, all of it. It was a great experience. But there was that awkwardness of being in a school that was using an image drawn from my culture for their mascot. And look, I got dubbed some of the nicknames. I mean, look, I got called Wapu, or sometimes some smartass would call me Pocahontas, and sometimes worse. And look, a lot of it seemed like it was in good fun, and it didn't beat me down. I honestly can't speak for my younger siblings, what they experienced here, and I think I probably helped pave the way, and if anything, my popularity in school probably didn't harm them, or leave them victims of much. But I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for them. But my experience was a good experience. But at 60 years old, I still remember. I still remember being on the playground in elementary school, and a girl who I really, like I said, grew up with her, just taunting me on the playground. One little, two little, three little. I mean, I remember chasing her one time and grabbing her by the back of her dress, one of those ribbons that tie around the back, and ripped it off. And I got in all kinds of trouble because, boys aren't supposed to rip girls' dresses. I didn't rip her dress off. And this is like fourth grade or something like that. I mean, but at 60 years old, I still remember. I can actually still, feel the frustration. What's a person to do, right? What's a guy to do? But what's anybody to do when they feel like they're being taunted for who they are in a school that is borrowing or appropriating, these images? And so I want to address this a little bit because, look, I reached out to my classmates first. I've talked about it on the show before. But I want to talk about it a little bit more. I've reached out to my classmates first, and I got good support from some. Some not so much. I had one of my classmates who she called me a racist, and I said, well, I don't think you understand what racism means. So let me explain that first. Racism doesn't mean that you hate somebody necessarily. You may, if your sense of superiority doesn't just make you feel better or superior to other people, but you feel like you've got to express that superiority in some sort of hatred or animosity, then racism can lead to hatred. But not everybody who's racist hates people of other races. I mean, look, there are a whole lot of white people who don't like black people, but they'll cheer for them when they're carrying their football on their team, whether it's their high school team, whether it's a college team, or whether it's a pro team. They'll root their asses off over black athletes who are performing as they feel for them. So in that moment, they're not hating on and oh no, I love black people. I've got a black friend. We hear that all the time. But racism doesn't require that you hate somebody who you perceive as a different race. It just means that you not only feel superior, but you're enjoying the benefits of the systems that have rigged the game against marginalized people. That's what racism. So when I say that I can't be a racist because I'm not white, it doesn't mean that I can't be hateful or I can't be a jerk. I certainly can. It doesn't mean that I can't be racially biased or I can't be. I can be all those things. But in order for me to be a racist, I've got to enjoy the systems that rig the game towards me by virtue of my race. Oh, look, I got into a big discussion the other day. This is, are black people enjoying black privilege because of the prevalence of black athletes playing in the NBA? And I said, no, they aren't signed by teams because they're black. They're being signed by teams because they're good. I mean. And so you get into this debate and people understand, no, what white privilege is the idea that your skin color is not a problem for you, where anybody else of different skin color, they're going to run into problems. They're handicapped because of it. I'm not saying there aren't poor white people. I'm not saying there aren't oppressed white people. I'm not saying there aren't white people killed by cops, wrongfully killed by cops. That certainly happens. It doesn't happen with the frequency or proportionally as high as it does for black people or native people. But more white people are killed by cops than black people. It's just that people of color, black people, native people, we are killed at a much higher, a significant higher proportion, but our populations are lower. Black people only represent 13% of the U.S. population. We represent less than 1% of the U.S. population. So, look, we could have a ton of native people, a real high percentage of our people killed by cops, and still not have more of our people killed by cops than white people are killed by cops. So this is what people just don't understand about what racism is. Racism is about superiority. Look, if I don't like a white person, and I've wrongly come to, and I've come to that conclusion that I don't like them because of the color of their skin, that's not racism. Oftentimes, that attitude is born out of responding to racism because I've had bad experience, perhaps, with white people. I mean, look, we as native people, we're always saying never trust a white man. We're told that. Now, is that a racist thing? No, that's based on experience. Now, that doesn't mean that I never trust a white man. Doesn't mean that I don't like lots of native or lots of white people. I do. But it doesn't mean that I don't have, a certain amount of defensiveness put up and defense mechanisms in place. So at the first instance of something being said, like Biden's comments or somebody calling me Wapu, that's one of those things that's gonna stick a little bit. So to have these conversations and to say, look, it is wrong for a school to have a race-based mascot. And they say, no, what's wrong with it? It's honoring. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. So I'm going to go through it a little bit. We're close to the bottom of the hour. So before I get into kind of addressing specifically what is wrong with Cambridge, New York, and here's the thing. Cambridge probably feels like they're doing it right. And look, I won't say that I experienced, overt racism, and nobody suggested that they were superior to me when I grew up. But where the white privilege comes in is the fact they think it's okay to call somebody. I mean, if we didn't even have a black person in our class. I mean, it's a really white town, okay? But nobody would have called that a black student Sambo or Kunta Kinte, or nobody would have done that because it would have been inappropriate. But look, calling me Chief or Geronimo or something just because they feel, or Pocahontas, just because they feel they can, because that's the privilege, right? So even if it's not meant to be hateful or mean, it's the idea, and this is where the racism comes in. It isn't just about being hateful. It's about having a privilege and being able to mock somebody's culture and not even bat an eyelash at it. And so again, that's what I'm going to talk about that here the second half of the show. I'll get into a little bit more about the Cambridge Indians when we come back. So anyway, this is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll be right back in a minute. All right. Hey, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Before I get back into it, let me thank my major sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank Eric White and ERW Enterprises and the folks at Grand River Enterprises as well. Look, I want to thank any of you and all of you who are making contributions. In fact, I forgot to mention this to Jake, but I do have somebody who does a monthly PayPal donation too. So I got to give a shout out for those who are using PayPal to make a contribution, and those who drop a check in the mail. Cindy, thank you. Your contributions help. It helps us buy more equipment and do what we do. Look, I want to give a specific shout out to look. We've got we're on Patreon. And if you go to patreon.com/Let's Talk Native, that's how you can see what the site's all about, and you can see what we're doing here. We have tiers that you can you can donate at a certain level, and I want to give a specific shout out to Melissa and Maximo Flint Morgan for being two of our Patreon subscribers, and we greatly appreciate it. Hey, and if you're not a subscriber of our podcast or our Let's Talk Native TV YouTube channel, you may be missing some content. So I encourage you to do both of those things as well. And as you see more and more of what we're doing here, hopefully you'll consider signing up to be a Patreon member or supporting us in some way, in whatever way you can. So we appreciate that. All right, hey, all right. So the Cambridge Indians. First, let me. And I got to say this, and it almost pains me to have to go through this. We're not Indians, okay? And Cambridge, you're not Indians either. I know that's still the name on your gym floor or whatever else, or on your logo. But you're not, and we're not. The word is it's wrong. It's a misnomer. It was a mistake. Columbus thought he reached the East Indies. He thought he could go west and come around the backside of the globe and come upon the East Indies and create some lucrative trade route. It didn't happen. Columbus was a moron. He miscalculated the size of the planet almost by half. you know, wasn't aware of the continents, wasn't aware of the Pacific Ocean. He literally thought he could sail out into the Atlantic and connect directly up to the Indian Ocean. Didn't happen, but he called us Indians and it stuck. And I know there's other theories about where that word comes from, but that's where it comes from. And the fact that it did stick, and look, some native territories call themselves that. The Oneida Indian Nation of New York, the Seneca Nation of Indians. Of course, most places are dropping the word. Canada, as a country, no longer uses the word Indian. They say First Nations and that kind of thing, but they don't specifically call Native people Indians anymore. An entire country stopped, not the United States. Look, and they used to use it. They have this thing called the Indian Act, which is still a law in the books, and they haven't changed the name on the law, but they stopped referring to the people as Indians. Now they call them First Nations. In the United States, there's still laws being passed. I think one of the ones, it's not probably the most recent, but Indian Child Welfare Act. Indian Child Welfare Act, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. They're still passing these kinds of laws with the word Indian. Of course, it's the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So it is locked into some of the vernacular, and even as we oppose it, there's still a lot of white folks that want to keep using it, and Native people too. I mean, so I don't want to pretend that we've all gotten in the same place. Look, my friend from Akwesasne, he kept using the expression Indian people. My good friend Roseanne Dunbar Ortiz, or Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, good friend. I don't know her name, right? Roseanne is not my good friend. Roxanne, in her book, she explains why she uses the word Indian in her book. She says because it's still accepted. Well, it's still accepted because it keeps getting promoted, right? And when you've got schools like Cambridge, and when I went to school there, Cambridge was kind of a progressive, I won't say it was hippie, but it was, it was a pretty progressive little village. I mean, we did theater, we did the kind of stuff that is associated with artsy kinds of people, that kind of stuff. So, but there they are. Still frozen in time with this idea of using a race-based mascot. And look, as I said, Cambridge thinks they're doing it right because back in the 90s, I think, and obviously the subject comes up from time to time. And I haven't lived there. I graduated in 1978, so I've been gone from Cambridge for a very, very long time. And as I've done some of this stuff at other places, I always thought, man, someday Cambridge is going to address it. And when they did address it last, nobody called me up. Nobody said, John, you were one of the prominent Native students who went to school here. What's your thought? No, the phone didn't ring. But they did have some other local natives. In fact, I know them. I'm related to them. I'm married into their family. There was another family there that they relied heavily on. And guess what? They were great with the name. But see, that's it. They thought because they had permission from some Native people who live amongst their white community that it was okay. And what they did was they changed the logo. Instead of the Plains Indian headdress, the same stereotypical image that everybody uses, they said, oh, no, we're going to be more appropriate. We're going to use a woodland, something that more represents the Iroquois. So they used that stereotypical image that if you go online and you look up Native mascots, images and go to the images, you're going to see a whole bunch that look exactly like Cambridge's mascot and a whole bunch that look like Cambridge's old mascot, because that's what they do. They and of course they lock it in time. They use a profile with a couple of feathers hanging down, maybe some braids, and maybe they'll do a mohawk haircut on the image, and they say, oh yeah, see, now we're appropriate. No, you're still treating us as if we're in the past. That's who we are. That's who we are. And they don't think that's a problem. Look, you would not call a team the Caucasians or the Whiteskins or and you wouldn't take something from somebody else's culture anyplace else. You wouldn't do it to black people. You wouldn't do it to Jewish people. I mean, there were probably a few schools that were using Arab images at some point, but they don't exist anymore. there was a certain, the Sultans or so. I don't know. I guess I could look it up. There were probably some high schools that were using. I mean, look, United States. They had the Shriners, and they had all of these organizations that had some sort of, look, the town that the township that Rwanda is in is called the town of Persia. So there you go. I mean, you can imagine that there could have been the use of imagery that came from an area that has no connection to Gowanda, New York. So look, even though you think you updated and you improved the logo, it's still a stereotypical image. It's not who we are. And to say, okay, we are the Indians and this is our emblem. Does anybody know anybody who's ever looked like that? I'll tell you. I probably do know a few people who have put feathers in their hair and braid their hair and maybe have a mohawk haircut. But that image that they're using, I don't, again, it looks like something from Last of the Mohicans. So it's still a Hollywood image. So they think they corrected it and that they're somehow doing it right. And again, as per my experience going to school in Cambridge, at Cambridge High School, I was not mistreated. And when I was there, I got to tell you, the whole Indian thing was not that big a deal. It wasn't pressed. I don't feel like that was our identity as a school even. I mean, yeah, they were called the Cambridge Indians or whatever else. But, I mean, one of the local towns was Greenwich, and they called themselves the Greenwich Witches. But, I mean, nobody owned these. It's a bigger deal now, it seems like, than it was then. So, no, it wasn't a big part of, but, being the only Native kid or among the few Native kids in a school predominantly white with all that white privilege, yeah, it was awkward. I mean, it was bound to be awkward. So, yeah, the logo is still wrong. The whole idea and the whole practice of using Native mascots is wrong. It's mockery. It is promoting stereo. It's teaching young kids. I mean, because this is the elementary school too. It's teaching young kids and kids at the most impressionable times in their lives, the young teens and later teens, that treating people or identifying people by a stereotype is okay. And that it's not just okay, it's promoted by tax dollars. And it's not. And look, as I said, one of the families that I went to school there in Cambridge, they were a family that my wife is related to them. I met my wife through this family. They left the area when I was in high school. And then they came back after I graduated from high school, and their kids went to school there. And they are Oneida and Onondaga. Their father of the kids that I went, he was Oneida, but my friend and his brother were Onondaga. Mother, matrilineal, followed their mother. And here's the bottom line, is both the Onondaga and Oneida Nation have clearly come out against the use of Native mascots, particularly by non-Native schools or sports programs. In fact, every Native nation, every organization of Native peoples, USET, NCAI, journalist associations. I mean, every organization, whether it's a trade organization, whether it's a political organization, they've all come out against the use of Native mascots, particularly by non-Native schools, by non-Native populations. They all have, every one of them. So if a couple of people who live in and around that town, who may or may not still have kids going to that school, as individuals, kind of revel in feeling special because the school calls themselves Indians and that's how they identify themselves, although nobody calls us that anymore. Not directly. I mean, any form you ever see, and anytime you ever see something to fill out, it might say Native American. There's no forms, government forms, state, federal, or any other kind of form that have you check Indian as a race or ethnicity. Not even people from India have that. So no, it doesn't exist. But if you're an individual, and again, the family I'm talking about, I know the friend that I grew up with, who again, my wife's cousin, he was a huge Washington football fan, knew all the players, had the jacket, had all that stuff. So clearly, the most inappropriate name, which was the Washington Redskins, he was okay with. So yeah, he was fine. I mean, he did take honor in the school calling themselves Indians because he says, "I'm the Indian." The idea of that tokenism that, oh, they are honoring me with their name. No, they weren't. No, they weren't. And while you might feel that way, the Oneida Nation, the Onondaga Nation, all of the other organizations, they oppose it. So when the school revisited this back in the 90s and they changed their logo from the Hollywood Plains Indian logo to the Hollywood Woodlands Indian logo, and felt like they got permission from some of the locals, then they felt like, okay, we did it right. Well, the problem is the winds of change haven't stopped blowing. The Washington football team dropped its name. The Cleveland baseball team, first drops its logo, its caricature of a native person, and is increasingly using Cleveland more and Indians less. All of the universities, essentially, except for the Florida State University, has done away with using native mascots. Schools, you can see it on the internet every week. Another school drops a native mascot, and it's not just the most egregious ones, Raiders or Savages or Warriors or Redskins. No, it's schools like Glastonbury dropping Tomahawk. It's schools that use the word Indian. I mean, they're dropping them all over the place. Now they're still, it's down to under 2,000, I think, across the United States. It's 1,900 in some, but it was far more than that. I mean, again, at a time when Native kids were being beaten in residential schools, ripped from their homes, hair chopped off, clothes ripped off, any items, anything that was Native was taken from them and discarded in the trash. Their names were changed. They were so stripped of their identity. While that was happening to Native kids, white kids were playing Indian, and they were doing it at school. They were Indians on their uniforms. They were Redskins. They were Warriors. They were Braves. They were the tribe. They were all that stuff. So white kids could steal, appropriate, use a Native identity with complete disregard to us. I mean, so forget this whole idea that it was honoring us. It wasn't. It was about them. It was always about them. What they could grab. Oh yeah, we want to claim to be the Indians, which is, in a way, it's almost bizarre. I kind of go back to the L. Frank Baum quote, because you got to ask, why would somebody want to be a people that their own country committed genocide against? Wiped them out with disease, wiped them out with venereal disease, wiped them out with starvation, and driving them off their lands, killed them, had massacres. Why would you want to be those people? Well, L. Frank Baum, he wrote just before the massacre at Wounded Knee that if you just exterminate them completely, so if you erase us, then they will speak in later ages of how great we were. And see, that's what mascots are attempting to do. They're trying to erase what really happened and say, oh, see how much we honor those people who came before us? We call our school that. Yeah, but you didn't honor us. And you're not honoring us because you're not even telling the freaking truth. So I started a petition. You can find my petition on Facebook, and I'll post it on Twitter. Again, I keep reposting it, and it's a change.org petition, and I'm asking for people to sign a petition, and we're just about 200 people, I think, that signed it. I mean, I've only had it up there for a little while. I'm asking for people to sign a petition, asking Cambridge to retire its name and mascot. I am working with a couple of classmates who have been very, very supportive in drafting a letter for the school board. And I do intend, I don't know what the COVID-19 thing is going to do to keep me from going out to Cambridge. Now, Cambridge is about as far away from here. I mean, it's clearly on the other side of the state, right next to the Vermont border. So yeah, it's a drive, but I'd make that drive. I've traveled. Like I said, I went all the way down to Wilmington, Delaware to speak in person at a board meeting, and I would certainly do that in Cambridge, or if we do it by Zoom, however. But I do know that I will be pitted against the native family that they've relied on to support keeping this long. And, and I don't want to, disparage them. They are entitled to their opinion, but I think it's important to realize that what I'm representing on this issue is what native people, in terms of, every statement, every tribal council resolutions, whatever you want to call it. The Haudenosaunee Grand Council has passed resolutions and have made statements on this thing. What I'm saying is what the vast majority of Native organizations have, is the position that they've taken. What the local family living amongst white people with not really much of a connection to Native peoples and Native territory. Look, they're living their life. They're living the American dream. They're more like them than like us. Now, and I'm not saying that to be disparaging. Look, they probably got all kinds of fancy, Native tokens hanging around their house and that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm sure they do. I mean, and look, these are not just a family that I'm married into. These were friends of mine. I grew up with these guys. We just don't agree on this. And in fact, they've moved really far to the right. They got Trump signs hanging at their places of work and stuff like that. That's kind of where that is. So that's a Native family who's really signed up for not just the white, but the right. The right-wing faction of American society. I'm not right or left. The first thing that people accuse me of is either being racist or I'm a liberal. Well, I'm not a liberal in your spectrum of American politics, and I'm certainly not a racist. Now, I will speak out about on these issues. But I'm going to say, I know one of the things that we always get hit with is, aren't there more important things to talk about? Yeah, there are. But you know what? As we're talking about things like Biden's comments erasing us, we still have almost 2,000 schools in the United States that are using Native images, Native names, Native references, Native words for their amusement and entertainment as mascots. And that contributes to this erasure. Look, I talked about genocide in the very beginning, and I feel like I've got to do this often. So I know I've said this on the show many times. Genocide isn't just killing people. It is killing people with the intent of eliminating a population. It isn't just rendering a people unable to reproduce. So it isn't just sterilization. But it is sterilization. It's not just sterilization. And our people went through that. They went through that through Indian Health Services. They went through that through the residential schools. It isn't just stripping of people away from the lands and their means of sustenance. Genocide is all of these things, including creating any condition that would cause the people to cease to exist. If you write us off as a living, breathing, contemporary people and only relegate us to being relics of the past, images from Hollywood or from Disney movies or something like that, if that's what you're going to do, I know this is tough for you. It's not just racist. It's genocide. Because you are doing that. You are essentially erasing me. Because you're saying this isn't what an Indian is, a Cambridge athlete with a football or a basketball or a lacrosse stick. In some of these white towns that they get to be, they're the Indians now. Why? Because that's what we call them. So genocide is all of this stuff. It's the idea of trying to eliminate who we are today. Because if you only are going to look at people as if we were something from the past. Again, it goes back to now. L. Frank Baum. In case those of you who aren't familiar, L. Frank Baum is the guy who wrote The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. He wrote 2 editorials that are called the Genocide editorials. You can look them up online. Baum, and it's Baum. L. Frank Baum is his name, writer of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. But if you look up his Genocide editorials, you'll see what he wrote. He called for our extermination, for our annihilation. And he said that they will speak in later ages of the grand kings of the forest and the plains. So eliminate us. Don't allow us to represent, because he said what we existed as at the time, we were nothing but a pack of mangy cur that licked the hand that smites them. He detested who Native people were, but he had some sort of fondness for what we had been previous to the contemporary times. And that's what we have now. Because, I also posted a meme. I said, the only thing more racist than white people using Native images for their mascots is the response once you tell them it's wrong. And I'm getting some of that. Look, I've got some great people that I grew up with, some that have only come to know me from my my hometown of where I went to high school, who are supporting what I'm doing. I got some people who aren't. I got some people who are trying to bash me pretty good. But this is the difference. This is where it's a little different when you take on a battle and you initiate, a controversy. I mean, the controversy is them calling themselves the Cambridge Indians. But by opposing it and, kind of throwing the gauntlet down here, I'm going to, you take this on. But that's, it's like when I was talking to Mike the other day. This is the life we chose. So while it was easier to be invited into a school to raise these issues than me going after, and perhaps that's why I waited so long. I guess a part of me thought, well, eventually they'll address it and somebody will get a hold of me and I'll weigh in. They haven't. And even though, the tide is clear, and look, Cambridge was a nice community. And I assume it still is a nice community. I think the current atmosphere of polarization, politically, racially, and all of that stuff, spreads across all other parts of life. And of course, this mascot issue turns into a right versus left thing too. You're invariably going to see the Trumpers clearly oppose changing. I mean, they were livid. They were angry that the Washington football team dropped their racial slur for a name. I mean, there are still a whole lot of butthurt white folks out there, white folks, right folks out there because of that. And so it turns into a right versus left thing. But look, I'm calling upon, people regardless of their political stripes to just acknowledge that this is a wrong practice. It is a race-based mascot. It is a race-based name. It's a wrong name, which is, again, I can't say that enough. We aren't Indians, but we're not mascots. And for anybody to think it's okay to take that, and even if they do have a couple of local, people who either claim ancestry, because, a lot of people will. I mean, there's a lot of quote unquote pretendians out there. And there's a lot of people who say, well, I'm 132nd Cherokee and I think it's fine. In the case of, the family that I'm speaking of in Cambridge, no, they're look, I know that they are Oneida and Onondaga. I know them. I mean, they're relatives of mine through marriage. I mean, and I grew up with these guys. But I also know that they're living that life there. They're not living in Oneida. They're not living in Onondaga. They're not a part of the communities that their nations are associated with. No, they, most of them are married off and married white women, which is, I'm not condemning that either. But it's, a lot of this, the generation is stopping with that family too, because of the matrilineal stuff. Look, most of them aren't going to have, Native kids, or at least, recognized Native kids. And that's a whole nother can of worms. And I'm not, this isn't a blood quantum thing. This is a lifestyle choice. I live on a Native territory. My wife is Native. My children are Native. But so these are the choices that you make. look, as you're growing up with people, and even in my own family, all my siblings, they're gone. They live in California, live in Texas, they live in various places, except for my oldest sister who lives in Mohawk territory, lives in Ganawage, and me. The rest of my siblings, they took a different path. And look, I don't, I have no ill feelings towards them. They chased whatever dream they saw was in front of them, and not every look. This isn't the easiest path to follow. I probably could have had all kinds of financial success if I'd have done something else with my life than this, but that's not what I was after. Look, we have different callings in life, and mine wasn't to chase financial success. I'm an activist, and I talk into a microphone to promote Native issues, to promote Native people. So that's the choice that I made. So when I talk about Native issues, I've got to include this mascot issue as one of them. And we're winning this thing. So this isn't, look, there's a lot of battles that we get involved in that are tough, man. I'm stopping a pipeline, stopping, trespass on our lands, stopping, housing developments on lands that we still claim as ours. We're in a constant battle. But the one that we're winning is this one. Because at some point, the weakness in the argument that anybody wants to make that they have the right to claim our identity for themselves, and oftentimes use inappropriate words or the wrong word, or misrepresent who we are so they can use. I mean, look, they're not using us as peaceful, men of peace, women of peace. They'll never use women. First off, they're always going to put a warrior or a chief, and if a choice, it would be a war chief, not a peace chief. That's what they've done. That's the image that they want to claim for themselves, ignoring the abuse and the genocide, the slaughter, the heinous crimes, the crimes against humanity that their country, that their ancestors committed against our people. No, they don't want to own that. They just want to own this image that they can, use that shows them as the fierce, noble savages. All right. Well, we'll see how this goes. We'll play it out, and I'll keep you informed as we go along with this thing, and I'll let you know when I go out to Cambridge. Maybe we'll get a recording or something. I don't know. But I want to thank you for listening. Again, don't cut Joe Biden any slack. Forget about Trump, but don't cut Biden any slack either. And hey, keep it going. Keep it real. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.